Hey everyone, my name is Sean Chagath, and I am an independent filmmaker, and on this channel I answer 2 film-related questions every week. Question 1. What is the first film you remember watching where you suddenly realized that there was a director behind the camera making deliberate choices rather than just a story happening on its own? I would have to say Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. I was actually too young to watch any of the original 3 movies in theaters, but I saw them at home not long after the trilogy was completed. I even have short flashbacks of sitting in my living room with my older sibling as they would watch either one of the 3 Peter Jackson movies, primarily the third film. For some reason, I can recall watching Return the King for the first time more when compared to The Two Towers or The Fellowship of the Ring. Even though I saw all of them together, I'm pretty sure, or at least within the span of a week length that I saw all of them together. Also, by the time I saw Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, I'd already watched the animated Lord of the Rings film from the late 1970s. And my family actually had a DVD copy of that, as well as Peter Jackson movies. So seeing different versions of the same story at such a young age indirectly made me realize there was actual people behind the scenes making these projects. The fact, too, that one of those versions was animated while the others were live action only solidified that point for me. In addition, I remember by the time that I watched Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, must have just won the Oscar for a few months prior because Peter Jackson was a name I had heard of, and I feel like I had seen his photo either on a magazine or, just videos of him on Entertainment Tonight as I was walking past the TV and somebody in my house was watching it. And, I remember that for the Lord of the Rings in this time period, that it was obviously an incredible movie, but it was also very revolutionary for cinema. The film was one of those rare fantasy films that actually received a number of top awards in the film industry. It, as well as I believe the Star Wars prequels, helped usher in the digital age of filmmaking with the use of computer-generated effects. The irony of that, of course, is that Lord of the Rings used a ton of practical effects. It really did. But Gollum's computer-generated technology was a highlight for sure. Gollum in general was a pop cultural icon, and even before watching the movie, I remember being somewhat aware of how significant of an achievement that character was for cinema as a whole. Finally, what really set Return of the King as a film where I realized there was a director behind the camera was because I remember noticing how the music, the costumes, the lighting, sets, the overall mise en scène were all perfectly chosen. At a young age, it clicked for me that someone had to be behind bringing all those elements together. There just had to be, right? In fact, it wasn't until I got a little older that I discovered just how many people, how many crew members, how many artists were involved in making an incredible movie, an incredible trilogy like The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, let's jump on to the second question of this video. If you could erase your memory of one movie just to experience the first watch all over again, which would it be? And do you think you love it as much today as you did the very first time that you watched that film? The Hangover would be the movie I'd love to watch again for the first time. Even now and again, I rewatch that movie, especially whenever I'm planning on going to Las Vegas or just come back from Sin City, or in general, maybe I have, some nostalgia for a Las Vegas trip I took recently. I always go back to The Hangover as well as Casino. And to me, The Hangover is still hilarious, even after the 20th viewing, 30th viewing, the 40th viewing. Honestly, I don't even know how many times I watched that movie, but it's been quite a lot. I don't even know. Maybe I've watched it 20 times, but I have watched it a lot for sure. And the idea of hearing those jokes and seeing the insanity that is The Hangover again for the first time sounds incredible. It sounds amazing. I can only dream of watching the end credits with the photos again for the very first time. I remember laughing so much and being actually in shock at what I was just watching, what I was seeing with my own eyes when those end credits were rolling. Still, to me, one of the best end credits scenes, along with 22 Jump Street, which is another movie that both those movies, 21 and 22 Jump Street, I would love to watch again for the first time. And speaking of The Hangover, going back to that, The Hangover to me, the thing is I actually think part two, which is obviously not on the same level as the first one, would still also be awesome to rewatch again for the first time with my memory completely erased. There are many moments in that part two and jokes that I think do land. I just overall don't like that they followed the same plot point where Doug is left out of the main adventure and the rest of the crew kind of have to go and figure out what's happened to him, or, figure out, kind of where his whereabouts are again. And, they did that in part three also. And it's underwhelming for me. Part one, I understand, but part two and three, I don't understand the creative choice personally, especially because I think the actor, Justin Bartha, who plays Doug, could have been actually a great addition to the overall shenanigans and the overall hangover that happens, the overall kind of mystery, with the whole crew. Because he showed a lot of charisma and comedic timing in the National Treasure series, which, by the way, is underrated. And I've been hearing for a while that they're supposed to make another one. Who knows? At this point, I don't know, but I do actually like those movies. Anyway, going on a complete tangent, to answer the second part of the question, do I think I would love the film as much today as the first time I watched The Hangover? Absolutely. No doubt about it, 100%. A lot of comedy movies in general, I think, would be great to watch for the first time. I remember, I just mentioned it right now, the 21 and 22 Jump Street movies. I watched those in theaters, and I remember it kind of shocked me at how, how at such a young age, it shocked me the humor of it, how, I guess unfiltered it was. And the idea of watching that again for the first time would be hilarious. Another movie too would be National Lampoon's Vacation. I wish I could have had my memory wiped and watched that movie for the first time. I remember when I first saw it, I initially saw that scene where Clark Griswold stops the car and curses his family out. I saw it actually on television. That was the very first time I watched National Lampoon's Vacation, and it was censored. And it wasn't until shortly after that I watched the DVD version, the end, which was completely uncensored. And that scene, I was dying on the floor laughing. It was hilarious too. And so, again, I can only imagine seeing that for the first time again. Just that feeling, that feeling of laughter. I think it would have the same effect. Maybe even be funnier too, because when I first saw that movie, I hadn't really done like a road trip to Disneyland at that point. I was really still too young, and we hadn't really gone to Disneyland at that point. It wasn't until I got a little bit older. And, now experiencing such a trip as both a passenger and a driver on multiple occasions, I think it would only make that entire movie funnier. And, even though another movie, actually, well, this isn't a movie, even though it isn't a movie, I'd love to watch The Office for the first time again. The show had a similar effect on me as the films I just mentioned. And yeah, just there's so many jokes from Michael Scott that I think would just be incredible to see for the first time. A non-comedy movie I'd love to experience again for the first time would have to be Django Unchained. Mostly because I remember watching Django in theaters opening weekend. How I got a ticket because I was way under the age of 18 and I watched it by myself, and it's an R-rated movie. I have no idea how I even got a ticket, but I did. I somehow did, and like I said, I watched it by myself, and I watched it at the Century Theater in Union Landing in Union City, California, which, by the way, shout out to that. That was kind of one of those theaters I used to go to a lot as a kid. It's also the same theater where I watched Black Panther for the first time, and I still remember I watched Black Panther opening night maybe, and when the Oakland title graphic appeared in the beginning of the movie on screen, I can't even explain, it wouldn't even do justice to me explaining to you how loud the audience roared with applause, because Union City isn't that far from Oakland. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's a number of people who just, who live in Oakland who were watching the movie in Union City. And just that moment itself was one of those moments you can never recreate, really. It's just a special moment in cinema. And going back to Django Unchained, I remember being completely lost in it, as if I was in the world being shown on screen. So I just love to try and feel that again with Django Unchained. However, I'm not sure. I think because I'm older and have seen so many movies now, I just might not feel that. But Django Unchained is still a great movie, so don't get me wrong. It's just, there's a certain time in your life when you're watching movies, and, for me, especially being somebody who works on videos and, does production, where, it's much easier to get entranced by a movie. And I think Django Unchained, I really felt that. So I would just, love to see if I can kind of get entranced by that again, see if it's, me or if it's, the movie, kind of, that makes sense. Another film that I would love to see again for the first time, but also I'm not sure would hold up as well, it would be J.J. Abrams' Super 8. I remember watching that in cinema and absolutely loving J.J. Abrams' film Super 8. I love that movie. I even had a poster of Super 8 in my room growing up. The soundtrack I listened to a bunch of times. I just loved the score. The reason why I loved it so much was because it reminded me of films like E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or, any other kind of film from that time period, even The Goonies too. And it's because it was a callback to the 1980s. It was set in the 1980s. And as a kid, that made me feel like I was in a time machine going back to the 1980s, which I never got the chance to personally experience. But I remember growing up, I admired a lot because I consumed a lot of media from the 1980s, whether it be movies or just music, anything. And so I remember Super 8 really hitting me in a very special place for that reason. That said, because of Stranger Things, I can't imagine Super 8 having the same impact on me. In addition, enough time has passed that I feel more nostalgic for the early 2000s than the 1980s, so I doubt a film like Super 8 would really grab my attention the same way it did back when it first came out. Also, too, the film, kind of is a little generic. It is kind of a copy and paste of some of those movies that I had mentioned from the 1980s. So who knows how I would feel about it now. I haven't seen it in a long time, but either way, though, I remember enjoying it a lot and would love to watch that movie again for the first time. Anyway, thank you again so much for watching this video as always, and let me know in the comment section below, what are your thoughts on these questions? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I want to know in the comment section below. And also, as always, please like this video, share it, and follow me on all my social media channels, as well as my YouTube account where I post all these videos. And as always, have a great day. Bye.